My encounter takes place in 2008. It was the summertime. Family members, there was 7 total of us. Around midnight, we decided to go on a hike. I had an uncle with us, and he was from Nevada, and he's like, I want to see something tonight. I really want to see something tonight. And then I was just looking at it, I was like, careful, what do you wish for? No, well, let's go then. So I took him on my running trails. I can run them trails, no stars, no moon. I know the area by heart. So, within 30 minutes of our hike, we walked behind these hills, probably like a mile away from the community of Helchita, Utah. This is the Four Corners area. So as we got to this hill, we heard some vocalization coming. Then sure enough, we pinpointed where it was coming from. It was coming from the east of us. We shined the light over to a hill. We saw some huge glowing pairs of amber eyes. They're walking back and forth because you can tell when someone's looking at you, turning, walking, looking, turning, going this way, and it was making a creepy noise. I never heard that in a while. Like I heard cougar. I know the different noise cougar, bobcat makes. It's creepy, but I know where they are. This one is something like from a horror movie, I would say. That creepy, but all 6 of my family members did not want to walk to that hill. And me being me, 18 at the time, I'm not afraid of much things, So I walked up to it, marched up to it. I'm like, it's probably an old man or old lady, that that's celebrating Halloween a little too early. So walked up there, getting closer. As I got closer, this thing stopped, pacing back and forth, and it stood square facing towards me. And 70 yards came to 40 yards, and it was getting to 35-yard marker as I got closer, and I realized that it had no neck. The sand, the dirt was all red, and it had hair, red hair. And then it was like almost looking like at a plywood, no, just shoulders, then the head, the conical head, that cone. So my brain just crashed, and I think all the old memories of the culture, from our past, everything, like a key just unlocked the secret door. Then some old ancient memories came flooding, and I stopped in my track, and I knew that I was looking at something ancient and something that's not human, something that's very physical, not spiritual, something that's real and alive, huge monster. He's going, and he stops and he turns. Right here, he kept doing that. He's doing the samurai chatter, checking him coming. Got right there, he turned. He started going like this. So this thing started swaying back and forth. On one of your first films in Oregon, one of the guys did the imitation. Yeah, that one, that's what it did. That, but louder and longer. I stopped, and this thing was swaying. It was just, it had lungs. It had lung capacity, not like ours. It was going on for 20 seconds, screaming, and it was swaying. And I stopped, and I was like, "This is not a human. This is something else," And Sasquatch was not on my mind at all, not at all. We just all brushed it off as a skinwalker. And this thing backed up. It backed up over the hill. The hill is going this way, but my uncle's light was really bright. You can see the eyes light up still. It was amber. It was huge, like a huge softball-sized eyes. It was the distance between both eyes were really good amount of distance, and then the head, everything, it fit. This thing was huge. So it backed up on 2 legs. It was bipedal. I stopped right there, and then he's taking his steps back like this, slowly. Like this. So where I can just see his eyes and his head, and then gone. And then disappeared behind the hill. And I probably stood there for probably a good couple minutes in my tracks. And I finally managed to turn around. I keep looking back. I got to them the whole time. All 6 of my family members were just standing there. They're frozen. I got up to him. I told him, I was It's a cougar or a bobcat. Let's keep going. I lied to him. You know. I wanted to get my hike in. And we kept going. We got into this wash, this creek. It turned into a labyrinth. And the whole time, I made sure all my family get ahead, you know, probably 15 yards, 20 yards ahead of me, and I stayed behind because I knew this thing was a predator. You know, it didn't have to tell me its intentions. I felt it. Everything. This thing is dark. This thing is apex predator because his eyes is glowing. Predator's eyes at night, I noticed that it glows amber color. Cougar, bobcat, you know. So that's what I got. And it was front-facing predator, you know. This thing hunts. So if your eyes is facing forward, that's predator, right? so into that wash, you know, it was probably like about 20 feet, you know, the cliff on either side. So it was really deep wash, and you would hear pebbles and rocks falling on our left and right. This thing was stalking us, you know. I didn't tell my family members what I was feeling. I didn't tell them anything. This was just, I kept this all in-house. And, you know, 3 hours went by. We were getting closer to the community of Halchita. And I had the youngest family member. He was 15 at the time. He was probably like 5'5", you know. He got ahead of us, probably like 70 yards. He went around the corner. You know, I seen him. I took a glance down to look at my footing. There was no stars. There was no moon. It was just pitch black. Very quiet night, creepy night. I looked down. I took a glance back up, and you know, I see my cousin just coming flying at me. His mouth was wide open. His eyes was about to pop out. His hands was like this. He was flying, and he just tackled me. Boom, you know. And then I already had a feeling when he seen me. I told him, "What's up? What did you see? Tell me. What did you see? What did you see? What did you see?" And then it took him like a good couple of minutes. I calmed him down, and he told me that it was a big orangutan running towards him on all four. He said the hands was the biggest hands he'd ever seen, reaching out to grab him. But you know, he called it a skinwalker instead because, you know, we didn't know Sasquatch was not on our radar at the time. Everything was just all skinwalker, witchcraft, you know.
Estimate the height of the creature that you saw when you were 35 yards away.
Over 9 feet. I know plywood's 8 feet by 5 by 4 around there. You know, it's big. This thing was taller than the plywood standing up. It's probably like almost as tall as this arch up here. It was huge, very huge. And then we seen the same thing. You know, he'd be taller than the smaller cedar trees, probably like 7 foot tall cedar trees around there. This thing is taller than that. Maybe hunched over the trees. You know, when you shine your light, you're looking at a tree, you shine your light above the tree, you'll see the ugliest mug you'll ever see in your life. You know, we go spotlighting too, and these things would be, you know, peeking out over the tree, not beside the tree. It'd be taller than the tree looking at us. And they'd be throwing rocks and dirt, you know, be chasing us out of areas. You know, all these areas we spotlighted. You know, there's nobody lives there at all. It's just right off the San Juan River, slot canyons, you know, Lima Valley to Navajo Mountain. There's hardly anybody.
You mentioned skinwalkers a couple of times. Can you give us kind of a quick definition, quick historical, and why they would be sort of confused or tangled up?
Yeah, that's not origin the term, right?
Yeah. Well, the history of them, you know, a lot of people don't like to use that word skinwalker because it's human, but a lot of people don't like to say it in Navajo because it brings them in. You know, the original word is Yana'atlosh, Yana'atloshi. So that goes to, you know, he puts on the skin and he wanders around. Klosh, that means he wanders around. Yana'a, that means he goes inside of it, the skin, and he wanders around. So that's the translation. So that gift was given to us as protection against enemy tribes, because a long time ago, you know, you had the Comanches to the east, the Utes to the north, and you had a lot of hostile tribes all around us, you know. And then we got that gift to help us defend ourselves. So They would be messengers. Back in, it was in a journal where it took United States cavalry about a month to muster up 1,000 cavalry. And then it took the Navajo a half a day to gather 1,000 warriors. We would utilize them as messengers to go back and forth. They were called the messengers. Back then, they were a part of our warrior society. They were the weapons makers, the scouts, the raiders, the messengers. Then you had the healers, with the paramedics and stuff. Then the warriors that knew everything all in between. So, that was for us. Then over time, all the Indian wars stopped, the intertribal battles stopped, and everything became in-house fighting, jealousy, everything from emotional abuse to spiritual abuse and just having power over another individual. That's what's going on here. So whether, you affect that individual while they're sleeping or when they're driving, they get a piece of your clothing, your hair. So, any part of you that belongs to you, they'll take it and they'll use it. So they can shapeshift into any form they desire. So that's why we get confused with Bigfoot and skinwalkers. And sometimes when we're investigating a skinwalker sighting, turns out it's a Sasquatch sighting. So we get them confused a lot, And then the skinwalkers I've seen, from a traditional Navajo-attired man flying on a Navajo rug. That's one of the ones I seen in my high school days. Then the other one was a man with a lot of turquoise, a lot of necklaces and a lot of turquoise rings and sterling silver. He had no shirt, but he had a Navajo blanket draped over him. And he had a coyote pelt up here. And his legs from his hip down was coyote's legs, feet. And he wasn't standing on the ground. He was like above the ground, like this high. Yeah, standing there, gone.
Now, how do they do that?
The power from the underworld, from the dark one. Everyone calls it Azazel. So this is his world. This is all his kingdom here. We're only here just for a short while on this plane, this planet, but our soul's forever. So, it just goes another can of worms into another can of worms. And then the skinwalker, how you become a skinwalker, you got to give your firstborn up to them. And they came to me a few times already asking me for my firstborn. Yeah, I said no, because the skinwalkers can astral project during the daytime. They'll spy on you, gather information on you. Someone pays them to get rid of somebody in this area. We don't like them. You're Christians. Or I don't like them. They gave me a funny look. Go do something to them. They'll give that person however amount of money, or jewelry, or a vehicle. Then they'll go do their magic. They can see through walls. So it gets pretty woo-woo, Then our protection against all of that is Jesus Christ.
When I was growing up, I've never seen Bigfoot, only that one incident that I had driving on the road. They call it Dead Man's Curve. It was pitch dark. Driving, and the thought of me driving right through it is how many people died along that road going off that cliff. And when I looked back that way and I saw something hairy, and I was like, I could never picture, I'm like, it didn't look like a dog. It was like more like a human, but very hairy. I remember that. And I panicked, and I didn't want to swerve to the left or to the right. I just panic, and with the disbelief of what I saw, and I kind of step on the brakes to look in the in my rearview mirror to see if I could still see it, or if maybe it'll cross the road or something. But that was it. It was gone. It just whatever it is poked its head up and disappeared. And I'm just, at that time, I still, now when I really think about it, you know, with my son talking about Bigfoot, and then, hey, you know, that was probably Bigfoot I really seen. It was hairy. I'm like, hey, no skinwalker. I know, but his skinwalker is what, shapeshifter, but this is the opposite of what I saw. The head was, you know, like a human head would be smaller compared to what I saw. What I saw was just a shoulder length looking up, like peeking out to see, I don't know what I do, or maybe run off the road, but it was pretty huge. It was black, it was a brown or any other color. I remember kind of like a Chewbacca, you know, kind of type. But when I think about it, I think it was Bigfoot that I saw back then. I have another story that I like to share, and this was at a residential that we were sleeping at a friend's, and it was in a shade, charge, or what we call it, a shade house. So in between those shades, when we were sleeping, it was a full moon outside. When you try to look inside, it's just like all dark. But when you're inside, you're looking out, you can see, you know, pretty clear what moves around outside. But anyways, this was a while back. We were all crashing out in the shade house, and for some reason I couldn't sleep. I guess that fear that I had, you know, about skinwalkers, or, you know, cutting my hair, or, you know, doing something, just thinking about all these things, you know, that I don't want to believe, but I've seen it before. I've witnessed a lot of stuff, but before, and at that time, a lot of these things were going through my mind. I couldn't sleep, but I did have one blanket, but my friend was sleeping on the other skinny bed, and I was sleeping out across from her, you know, in a bed, and we had she had a gun under the bed that she was laying there, and then maybe I was just trying to go to sleep, and she was asleep. She went to sleep, and all of a sudden I heard somebody walking up, and I was like, the first thing that came to my mind is like, maybe somebody's lost, or somebody that's drunk that just popped out of nowhere. And I'm just like laying there thinking, oh, in the world would be walking at this, time of the hour when when people are sleeping. And all of a sudden, the sound of that footprint started getting closer to that shade house, and I kind of peeked my head up really slow, lift my head up to see who it is, and I could literally see this dark figure walking right at the foot of my bed, where the woods were at, like the logs that were leaning against each other. I could see it, and it stopped. And I'm laying there like I didn't know what to do. I was way younger, a teenager, and I put that blanket over my head to hide. And I was just like starting to, when you're scared, you start to breathe like fast, like you're running or something. And it stopped, and it tried to look inside is what I saw, and that's when I put that blanket up over my head, hiding. And then I could hear it walk right off. Start walking again. And I slowly put the blanket down, and I I didn't want to get up because it's one of those old bed that makes squeaky sound like the metal. I didn't want to move, and I'm just like trying to lift my head up and see where it went. My friend had the gun in her hand and ready to shoot if it was trying to come in. And then we just laid there like breathing really heavy. What did we just saw? Again, it's black and very tall. And it looked like, it looked like a giant, but when I thought about giant at that time, seriously, I thought about the biblical stories about the giants, how they were here, and it's part of something that that bloodline. But I've never thought about Bigfoot. Never ever I thought about Bigfoot. And then now at this age, I'm looking back like, man, that's what I saw. It's weird. It's just, these are real out there. Bigfoot are real. But at the time when I seen it, I wasn't thinking about Bigfoot.
From collecting a lot of stories and gathering a lot of, witness testimonials, running around on the reservation, that one of the stories that would come back to me is that, a witness one time seen that Sasquatch and a Skinwalker getting into it. I guess they want to visit the same guy's house, and I guess they showed up at the same time, and he looked out the door, and he's seen what looked like a big hairy monkey beating the crap out of a man in a coyote pelt. And
That'd be a sight, huh?
Yeah. And that man taking off, So I came across strange stories like that, and even from my own experiences growing up in a very remote part of the reservation, is that we choose not to talk about Sasquatch at all. We choose not to acknowledge him, or it's very taboo in our culture, and a lot of I think we confuse a lot of the Bigfoot encounters with Skinwalker encounters.
Weren't you telling me that a lot of people use the term Skinwalker when they're talking about those different things? It's sort of a universal term, but oftentimes they're either Bigfoot or something else.
Yeah. There's a lot more strange events take place here on Navajo Nation, and there's a good chunk of it is Sasquatch related, and there's a certain amount of percentage of Skinwalker, and you could see a centaur, you could see all kinds of crazy things, and all of our people choose to put it underneath witchcraft, the Skinwalkers, the death cult, that they do their own thing in the caves as well. Sasquatch is not the only one that lives in the caves, so you got to be careful what cave you enter. It could be a cult's cave or a lizard man's cave. Yeah.
And we saw two tall ones, all hairy. They were running. There was an orange one, and there was a brown, dark brown. And at that time, there was an old hogan right where that's where it went in.